And I'm really pumped for 2014 for Connect. It's going to be a great year. It's going to be better than last year, for sure. And last year was pretty awesome. So I believe that God's going to do some incredible things in us and through us, in our community and in our families and with our friends. So stay tuned and stay open to the possibilities of being able to go and do things that you never thought you might possibly do before. Now, last year was our year of love, and so you would have noticed that every every message that we had on a Supernova night had a theme about love. Love was wrapped up in everything that we did, and we try to incorporate it in everything because God is love. And so if we're going to talk about God, if we're going to talk about Jesus, then love's going to be a very, very important component. And I think on Valentine's Day, it's an even better time to talk about love. Who got something for Valentine's Day? I wasn't in the room. Yeah, a few people. Excellent. That's all right. Guys, there is still time. And I am not a believer in the self-pitying, I'm single on Valentine's Day, woe is me. I don't believe in that at all. I believe in spreading as much love to as many people as I possibly can. Because although I may not have a boyfriend, I do know that I am loved by lots of people, and I do know that I also love a lot of people. So the chocolates that were on your chair, consider that a Valentine's Day gift from Connect to you. Happy Valentine's Day. I hope you had a great day. I hope it wasn't too painful for you. I hope that you felt special in some way. And even if that's just tonight, that's all right. This year is a year of stories. It's going to be our year of stories. And as Nate said before, it's going to be talking about your story. And it's going to be talking about my story. And we're all going to be talking about his story. And when we talk about his story, I mean God's story. I'm talking about Jesus' story. Because I believe that it's his story that brings your story and my story together. It's what puts us all in a room together. I don't believe that any of us are here by accident. I believe that we were all purposed to be in this room. I believe you're all meant to be my friends because God wanted it to be that way. And I believe that I have stuff to learn from your stories. You may not realize it yet, but you have been writing the story of your life since the moment you took your first breath. And there's been this story that's been accumulating. You may be thinking at this point, well, my story at the moment sucks. I don't like my story, or my story is really boring. Nothing happens in my story. And you look at somebody else's stuff and they've had all this stuff going on. And you might be thinking, well, mine just doesn't compare to that. But can I tell you, your story is incredibly significant, and it is special, and it is powerful. And this year, I would like to encourage you to be able to share your story. Be prepared to open up a little bit. Be prepared to tell someone what's going on in your life, because I believe it will be an encouragement to a lot of other people. I want to encourage you to be open to receive from other people's stories, hear other people's stories, and we're going to hear a lot of them over this year. We're going to hear a lot of stories from the team, the leadership team, but also I want to be hearing your stories as well. We want to give opportunities for you to be able to tell, maybe it's not your full life story, but maybe it's part, maybe it's like a slice, maybe it's a chapter of the novel that is becoming your book, it is becoming your life. I want to hear your stories because I believe I can learn from your stories. And you're thinking, yeah, well, Tess, you're a whole lot older than me, and you're a youth pastor and stuff. What are you going to learn from my life? Trust me, I have not lived your life, and therefore I can learn from your life. And so that's the attitude in which I want to take this whole year on, is that we're open to be able to share our stories because your story is important and your story is powerful. But also to be able to receive somebody else's story, to be able to hear somebody else's life story and go, you know what? Wow. What happened there, what you went through and what you did, that's incredible. Man, if I could learn from that and be able to go, you know what? If I come up against that type of situation in my life, I want to be able to learn from you and be able to learn maybe from your mistakes, maybe from the great stuff that you did and the right choices that you made, so that when I get to that point, I can make the right choice and I don't have to hit myself again, hit my head against the brick wall and go through all the pain and all the suffering of making the bad choice and then having to do the whole thing again so that you can make the right choice. Let's be open to be able to share stories. And lastly, let's be open to be able to hear about his story, hear about God's story, because above and beyond, his story is the most important story. His story is the whole reason why we have stories. It's the whole reason why we get to exist. It's the whole reason why this planet exists, is because of his story. And so let's be open to, learn about his story. Right from the beginning, right through to the end. Let's be open to go, you know what, I've got something to learn from his story. I've got something to learn from other people's stories. And you know what, my life's going to be better because I've heard his story and because I've heard your story. And so that's what this year is going to be about. But tonight, I wanted to tell you, because it's Valentine's Day, would it be all right if I told you a love story? Yeah? Some of you are like, yeah. Some of you are like, what? Huh? Is it all right if I tell you a love story? Yeah? It's Valentine's Day, let me enjoy this. Well, I wanted to tell you about a young girl named Jane. She was 21, so she's probably a bit older than some of you, but she's younger than others of you. Young girl, she grew up in like a country town, and, where everyone knows everyone, that kind of thing. And she'd grown up there her whole life, and she knew everyone in the town. It was out country way, so, beautiful scenery kind of thing. A lot of the place was dirt roads. You'd have to drive along dirt roads to get anywhere. Anyway, she's grown up in this town, and she's a sweet thing. Seriously, she's one of those really nice, wholesome country girls that, are on the TV kind of thing. That's Jane. She's perfect. She's this gorgeous brunette, thin little thing, beautiful big blue eyes, just a gorgeous, gorgeous girl. Anyway, she wakes up this one morning and she's super duper excited, like incredibly excited, because growing up in this small town, she met the one. She met the one, and he was something special. He was a really handsome young man, a couple of years older than her. They met in high school, they fell in love, and now they're getting married. And she wakes up this morning and it's her wedding day. And it is so exciting for her, and she just can't wait to start getting ready. Now, they've done the whole thing properly, right? So they haven't seen each other the night before the wedding or anything. They've made sure that they've stayed separate, and they want to do it traditionally and everything. So she wakes up and she starts getting ready, and she's so excited. Now, it's a small country town, so it's not one of these huge, big wedding kind of things, although the whole town is invited to this wedding. But that's because the town is not huge. And she's getting ready by herself. She doesn't have a lot of bridesmaids and that kind of thing. That wasn't what she wanted. She wanted a simple wedding. Simple wedding in a church, just the way that she'd imagined it her whole life, with her friends and her family and her township around her. This is what she's imagining, and she can't wait to see her fiancé in his very dapper suit, because normally he's just in jeans and workwear, because he's a farmer, and he's got the arms on him, He's a piece of something special, a piece of country special, because that's how they breed them out there. She's excited, and she can't wait for them to start their life together. So she's getting ready, and she gets her hair all immaculate as she would. And she's, touching up her makeup, and it's all looking really, really lovely. And she's getting herself ready, and she can't wait. And she's got the most beautiful dress. It's the dress of her dreams. And this day is starting out spectacularly. She can't wait. She's so excited. Anyway, she can't wait for her husband to see her, 'cause she knows she looks fine. This is super special. And she cannot wait to be married to her fiancé. So she gets into the car. She's all ready, and she slides into the car, making sure her hair doesn't hit on the roof of the car and stuff. And she slides in, and she's on her way. And remember, there's dirt roads everywhere. so it's a bit bumpy and that kind of thing, but she's in the back and, the butterflies are starting in her stomach and, she's all giddy and, just smiling to herself. And all of a sudden the car veers off the road and crashes into a ditch. She didn't expect that to happen. Now Jane's alive. Jane's alive and she's in one piece, but, crash a car and you're not necessarily all in one piece mentally, emotionally, and you're pretty shaken and you're pretty raw. And she kind of climbs out of the car and she's okay. There's a couple of bumps and bruises, but, her hair started to fall out of, the perfectly pinned bun that she had it all in. And she's like, and when you get the panic breathing kind of happening, and she's standing beside this car and she's kind of just shaking, not knowing what to do because this was not in the plan. This was not what was supposed to happen. It's kind of like what can sometimes happen in our lives. Car crashes, and not just the car crash that we may have, but the metaphorical car wrecks that happen in our lives. It's the things that we've never planned for and we kind of have no control over, but it just happens. And it kind of leaves us shaken and a bit bumped and bruised and not quite sure, what's supposed to be happening. This happened in my life when I was, quite young. I was probably about 7 years old. And my grandmother was diagnosed with a brain tumour. And it wasn't a good one, and it took her pretty quickly, and she passed away. And when you lose a grandmother, that's pretty shocking. At the time, it didn't quite hit me. It took a couple of years for it to hit me that I'd lost my grandmother, and I remember being in the shower a couple of years later, and all of a sudden bursting into tears and just crying my eyes out. And when I got out of the shower, of course, you're all red and blotchy and, super duper attractive. And I came out into the kitchen and Mum's just like, what's wrong? And I just burst into tears again. And I'm like, I can't believe Nana's dead. And it took me a while. And I think it probably shocked my mum because it had been a number of years, yet it took that long to hit me. And that itself was shaking up. But we had a really tight, close-knit family. And we had a lot of extended family that was, quite, close-knit and tight. And we'd meet up for Christmases and birthdays. And I'd see all my second cousins and all of that, all growing up. And, we'd all get together and it was great. And it was my family and it's what I knew and it was safe and it was my environment. But what I didn't realize was, as a child, on the adult level, there were all these cracks that had started to appear. There were all these cracks that had started to form in the relationships between the family. And what I didn't realize was that my grandmother was, kind of like the glue that was kind of holding things together. But when she passed away, the family that was held together tentatively, which I hadn't realized, fragmented and broke apart. And so there were family members that I no longer saw anymore. Family members that I'd see on a regular basis. Family members that had babysat me weekly while my mum was working. And so they would look after me and all of a sudden I didn't see them anymore. I didn't realize that when my grandmother passed away that not only would I lose my grandmother, but I'd also lose my family. And when you're young, you don't get it. It's hard to imagine that something that you have no control over can impact you and have such a great effect on you. And so I was left a bit, well, what's going on? Like, why don't we talk to those people anymore? Why aren't they at the family functions anymore? Like, I don't understand. Why are they angry with so-and-so? I don't get it. Why is my family breaking apart? We have these car wrecks in our lives. They're like the sudden shock things that kind of hit our world and hit our lives. And we have no control over them whatsoever. Yet they seem to impact us so profoundly. And we can be walking in our lives and be carrying the stun or carrying the shock, carrying the grief of those impacts for years. We can be carrying those effects on us for years, or we can just stand. Some people don't move on from that point. They just don't know what to do. And I don't know about your lives, but maybe you've had a car wreck kind of situation in your life, in your story, where you're alive on the other end of it. You're here, you're sitting in this seat, but it's still profoundly impacted you. Jane kept walking. She's like, I've got to get to this church. She's like, I should be all right, like we'll just tuck the hair back behind my ears and we'll get there because my groom, my fiance, is waiting for me. The whole town is waiting for me. They're all at the church. I've got to get there. I've got to be there. So she starts walking down this road, and it's, dirt road, and so she's trying to make it as fast as she possibly can. And all she's trying to fix herself and, tidy up her dress the best that she possibly can. She's trying to hold back the tears because, it's kind of overwhelming. What she's been through, this has not been in the plan. This was not it. This was not the way that it was supposed to be. But she's just like, I'm going to get there and it's going to be fine. This is a hiccup and that's okay, but we're going to get there and we're going to be great. And she's self-talking. And as she's self-talking, all of a sudden her feet kind of get caught up in the dress because this dress is not meant for, long walks. It's meant for walking down the aisle and sitting gracefully and those kinds of things. It gets all kind of caught up in this dress and she falls. And she finds herself on her hands and knees in the dirt. Tears start streaming from her eyes. And she can't believe that she's in this point again. She kind of turns up her hands and she realizes that there's gravel grazes all over her hands. And she's got blood over her hands. And she looks down at her dress that's now torn. And there's blood around her knees and dirt. And everything's just all over. And she's just there in that moment. Unable to move, barely able to breathe, mascara running down her face as the tears keep pouring, and she's wondering if she can ever move past this point on the road. We have those moments too. And maybe you've fallen over and grazed your knee, or maybe you've fallen over and grazed your hand, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the times where we stumble and we kind of have something to do with it. Car wreck is one thing. That's where something is completely out of our control and it just happens and it's a snap. One of these stumbles is where we kind of make our own mistake. We trip over our feet or whatever, and we trip over in our lives and we make mistakes and we mess things up. And sometimes, it can be one of those, okay, I'm not too bad, and we can kind of get past it, a little bit shaken, but sometimes it's the whole, I can't breathe, I can't move on our hands and feet, messed up, bloodied, clothes torn. All of those metaphors rolled into one, gasping for breath, aching on the inside. Cannot believe that this has happened to me. Cannot believe that this is happening now in my life on this day that was supposed to be so perfect. I don't know about you if you've had one of those mess-ups, those stumble times where you've just messed it up and royally. I know I've had one of those times. When I'd just finished high school, I, out into the big bad world, as they may say. But I was out and I was making my own decisions. And up until that point, I remember I had made a lot of I will never statements. I would never do that. I'd see other people's lives, I'd see the choices that they'd make, and I thought I was smarter. I thought that I'd be able to, no, I'd never go there. No way. How could you do that? But I was 18, I'd just finished high school, and I started making some really, really bad choices. I started messing some stuff up royally. And I was doing it consciously, thinking that I could handle it, that I could do this. I could live this lifestyle. I could go there, I could be with these people, and it wouldn't affect me. I could still be the same person. It would be different for me. The rules were different for me. And so I'd be making these choices. And I'd know in my head, in the back of my head, that these choices were wrong and that I shouldn't be doing them. But I did them anyway because it felt good at the time. And I kind of just wanted to do it just to see how it would go. 12 months later, I found myself on my hands and knees. It wasn't on a gravel road. It was in my bedroom, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face because I had messed up royally and I didn't know how I was going to make it past that point. I had messed things up so badly and it was my fault. Those were my choices and I can't believe I did that. Here I was the person saying I would never, and that same person that said I would never was a person on the floor who had done all of that. You get to that point where you stuff things up. And maybe you've been at that point up until this point. Maybe you haven't yet. Maybe you're in the midst of it. I don't know where you're at, but we have those moments in life where we're kind of on that road, hands and feet, gravel, bloodied, bruised, and gasping for air, thinking, what am I going to do now? Jane's mind then turned to her fiancé and the church that was waiting for her, and which now she was late for, an unexplained late. And she's thinking, I can't do it now. She's kind of looking at herself and, that hysterical laughter that kind of starts. What am I gonna do now? Like, look at me. I'm a mess. There is no way that piece of country fine, nicest guy she ever knew, love of her life, would move mountains for her, perfect guy. How could he want to marry this now? Blood on her hands, blood on her knees, torn dress, hair a mess. Not the picture of the perfect bride, right? Not the picture of the person that should be walking down the aisle. Can you imagine opening those doors and seeing that stand at the end of the aisle when you're expecting perfection and what ends up is a bloody mess? Somehow she picks herself up. She doesn't know how. I don't know how she did it. She picks herself up and she's just thinking, if I can just get there, maybe he can imagine. Maybe we can reschedule. Maybe he can imagine what I'm supposed to look like. Maybe he can imagine what I once was, what I was supposed to be. And then maybe he'll be able to accept that. Maybe. It's all full of maybes. And she starts stumbling towards the church. She's aching from head to toe. Tears still streaming down her face. And she's trying to, wipe tears away. And that's just smearing blood and dirt all over her face. And she is a mess. And she kind of gets to the doors of the church. And she stops for a second. She stops for a second. And panic kind of wells up in her, and she's like, but what if he doesn't? What if he can't remember? I know he says he loves me. I know I've heard other people say that they know that he loves me, but what if he can't love this? I've been a good girlfriend and fiance up until this point. Like, I've been good. I've behaved myself. I've done really well, but today this is not working. And what if this is too much for him? What if he can't handle this? What if he can't do this? And she stands there, and someone on the other side of the door must have realized that there was someone standing there, obviously expecting the blushing bride, and swing open the church doors. And there is the whole town, and they're all looking at her. Her fiancé standing up at the altar, the other end of the aisle, facing her. And there she is, in all her disgrace and all her shame, in the mess that she is, in front of everyone to see. And all she can look at is her fiancé down the other end of the aisle. And she wasn't sure what to expect, but in the blink of an eye, her fiancé starts running up the aisle towards her. Running up the aisle, and as he's running up the aisle, he takes his jacket off and he wraps his jacket around her. And he holds her tight and he won't let her go. And he gently walks her up to the other end of the aisle, in front of the minister, in front of the crowd that has started whispering and is, did you look at her? What happened to her? I don't know what happened. As people do. As a country town would. And she's, not quite with it. She's not the one walking. He's the one walking. And she kind of feels like he's carrying her down towards the other end of the aisle. And at the other end of the aisle, he tells the minister to start. And he marries her right there. She didn't expect her happy ending that day. In the morning she did. She absolutely did. But towards the end of the day, she wasn't expecting that happy ending. She was expecting scorn or pity is what she was expecting. But what happened to Jane was that the one she loved and the one that she walked towards loved her back, loved her more than she could ever imagine. And he covered up the mess that she had become. And right there in front of everybody, he made a vow to love her and to cherish her in the good times and in the bad times. That he would always be with her, that he would always protect her, that he would always take care of her. Jane and her fiancé, that story is like the story about Jesus and us. Because we start out this life perfect. The dreams and the plans that we have for our lives and for our stories are fairy tale worthy. But unfortunately, the way that the story plays out sometimes isn't that fairy tale. We have the car wreck moments in our lives that leaves us shaken and bumped, and we had no control over those at all. They happen to us, but it impacts and it changes sometimes the course of our lives and changes the course of our stories. And we have those moments like out on the road where she had stumbled and she fell. And it's those moments where we actually have something to do with it, where we are actually the one that is making the mistakes, is making the choice, is tripping up, is stumbling. And we mess ourselves up, and we can mess ourselves up pretty badly. And we think in those moments, we think about God, we think about Jesus. And maybe it's not I know Jesus. Maybe it's the idea of Jesus. I've heard about Jesus and this perfect guy that's supposed to be all these wonderful things, and he's supposed to want a relationship with me, but I'm looking at my hands and they're dirty and they've got blood on them. And I'm looking at my clothes and I'm not clean and I'm not tidy and I'm not presentable. And that's what I've heard I have to be if I'm going to approach Jesus. If I'm going to approach God, I've got to be right. I've got to have it. My hair has got to be immaculate. My makeup has got to be perfect. My clothes have to be amazing. I have to be completely clean. I'm not allowed to make mistakes. I'm not allowed to have bad things happen in my life. God is for those good people. God is for the Brady Bunch kind of people. I was watching Little House on the Prairie yesterday afternoon. I was getting my hair done and it was on TV while my hair was processing. And I'm watching this Little House on the Prairie, and I remember watching it when I was a little kid. And so maybe some of you haven't watched it, but it's about this really, really wholesome, good family, back country town in America, and they just make all the right decisions, and they never raise their voice at one another, and they are perfect. They are the perfect family. And when trouble comes up against them, they make the right decisions and it all goes well for them. See, that's the kind of people that God's supposed to associate with. Because God is out here and he only deals with the perfect people. And we think that I could never live up to that. I am not Little House on the Prairie by any stretch of the imagination. And we think, well, God doesn't want to have anything to do with me. But something might draw us to the place where we keep trying to get a little bit closer to God. And we think that maybe he could just pretend like none of this has happened. Maybe he can just close his eyes and he can just imagine that I'm perfect the way that I'm supposed to be. The way that we're all supposed to be, without the mess-ups, without the bad family past, without all of that stuff and all the baggage that we can bring with us on our journey. But God doesn't close his eyes and pretend like what has happened hasn't happened. He doesn't do that. He does something much greater and much more powerful and more effective than you could ever imagine. What he does is that he comes out and he comes to meet you. And you may not be where you're supposed to be. See, Jane was supposed to be at the other end of the aisle in front of the minister, perfect. And what he does is he takes his perfection. He takes what the Bible calls his righteousness and he wraps it around us. He doesn't excuse what's going on. He doesn't excuse the mess-ups and the stuff that's gone on in our lives that makes us imperfect. He doesn't excuse it, but he covers it. He covers it with his own perfection. He covers it with his own righteousness or rightness. He covers that. And what he does is he promises, regardless of how you came to him, that he will always cover all of that. That his perfection, Jesus' perfection, is enough. He will cover it. And all you have to do is say, Jesus, I want a relationship with you. I want to be with you in the good times and in the bad times. And I want to be with you till death do us part. And even then, after death comes heaven, and so we'll never have to be apart. The Bible actually talks about this clothing and covering in two places. So if the guys want to put the Galatians part up, that would be awesome. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 27, it says, "For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ." See, we wear Jesus. When we've accepted Jesus into our lives, when we've said, you know what, Jesus, I want a relationship with you, he then covers it and we're clothed in him. So his perfection is over us. And so anyone who can see us, and when God looks at us, he sees Jesus' perfection. He sees that jacket covering us. In Isaiah also, if you want to flick to the Isaiah passage, in chapter 61, verse 10, it says, "I will sing for joy in God, explode in praise in my soul. He dressed me in a suit of salvation. He outfitted me in a robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom who puts on a tuxedo, and a bride a jewel tiara." See, Jesus doesn't leave us in the bloody mess that we can become. What he does is he covers us and he cleans us up. It's so much more powerful than just pretending like it never happened. He addresses it and he fixes it.